are going to very happy today to have our keynote speaker. Very appreciative of him making some time for us and coming and sharing his story and time with us. Tony A. Nastio Johnson is a member of the Chinook Indian Nation, a scholar of language and culture, and an artist born in his tribe's traditional territory on Willapa Bay. He attended the University of Washington and Central Washington University and directed the language program for the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde from its beginnings in 1997 until 2010. He acquired Chinook Wawa as a second language from his elders. Johnson was the education director for the Showalter Bay Indian tribe on the north shore of Willapa Bay, where he lives with his wife and children. He is a father of 5, enjoys producing cultural objects from his tradition, and is an experienced canoe maker. He has been the chair of the nation's cultural committee for more than 20 years and was elected chair of the nation's tribal council in 2015. He is currently the elected chairman of the nation, as well as being employed full-time as a program officer for a large foundation that serves the people of Washington State, its neighboring communities, and beyond. If you would please join me in welcoming Mr. Tony Nastio Johnson.
I'm going to speak in Chinook first, except that I feel like between the introduction and the applause for lasagna, I'm probably in pretty good shape. Yeah, well, kanchi slushtamdam naika mislat ilap kabumasaiga be kanchi slushtamdam naika kwansam kanchi slushtamdam naika pas chago yakwapas mislat kabanakotat. Uguk ili Ukan Saikat Latsa Bili Pi, well, Kagwa Quantum. Pusna Mislut Yakwa, Hayu Ikanam Chaguna Dumdum Pi Wachta Kimdux Pusin Saika Ankadi Tilachum Chaguna Dumdum. I think Kunchi Slush Dumdum Naika Pus Mislut Elip Gubba Masaiga means, by the way, I don't think this, I know this. It means I'm pleased to be standing here in front of you. I was referring to the fact that I'm always pleased for the excuse to be here at Nakutat. Nakutat is the name of this place. And, you know, as related to what I really want to say to you all tonight, being on the ground in a place like this brings up a lot of thoughts, feelings, memories from our teachings and our traditions. And that's probably why it is that I said I appreciated the excuse to be here. My name is Tony, or, well, my tax name's Tony, how's that? My name is Nastio. My Chinook ancestry comes through my dad. My dad is a Wakayakam, Lower Chinook, and Clatsop man. He also has inheritance and ancestry from our Salish neighbors, both to the south and north. So the folks I named are Chinook-speaking tribes, and we're also, though, Tillamook and Upper Chehalis from Sacha. My ancestor Oskalowilix was a treaty signer at Anson Dart, Haugat Nathlushwawa at Tansy Point, not too far away from here. He was a Wakayakam headman and also signed for the Kuniak tribe, which is Oak Point, a little further up the Columbia River, closer to Longview. Our Chinook Indian Nation is made up of 5 tribes here at the mouth of the river. The Clatsop, where we're standing. This is Clatsop territory. The Cathlamet going up the Columbia River just past, well, Tongue Point, but Astoria. And then opposite of the Cathlamet country is the Wahkiakum country on the north shore of the Columbia River. And then heading back down the Columbia to the mouth is the lower Chinook, and then the Willapa of Willapa Bay. So those 5 tribes make up our community. There's actually 2 languages involved there, both Chinookan languages. And, we've been united by blood forever, and then united under kind of all the duress of folks moving in and moving us out of the places that we preferred to be, and the diseases that caused incredible damage to us. We ultimately ended up amalgamating into villages where those 5 tribes were represented in almost every case, and probably in every case by the 1890s. All of us were just together where it was that we could survive. And my wife is also Lower Chinook and Clatsop. She's also Tillamook and Lower Chehalis, but she's a direct descendant of Wasilta, who's the hereditary chief of the Clatsops that signed that 1851 treaty for Clatsop that addressed this land here that we're standing on. So I'm saying that because, of course, this is my kids' inheritance, is these family lines, the traditions that come from them, and the sovereignty that springs up out of the ground of our lands. I was born into a social justice fight around the Chinook community. I will say more about that. I'm not going to say a ton about it to start, but I will say that my great-great-grandfather is buried in Astoria. His name's John Pickernell Jr. He was amongst a group of men and women, hereditary leaders, really, who hired our first attorneys in the 1890s to address the illegal taking of our lands, and really was born into that fight. To just finish a thought about that, we were allowed to sue the federal government in the 1950s for the Clatsop lands that we're standing on and the Lower Chinook lands on the North Shore, and won a court case in 1970. I'm telling you this story because we're not used to many wins in our lives, so that felt like a win in 1970, although if I told you the dollar figure we won, it's just egregious. But despite that win and a duly adjudicated court case in the Indian Court of Claims, we have never been paid that money, and though have a federal lawsuit since 2017 that just resulted in the Bureau of Indian Affairs committing to putting forward a bill, hopefully in this Congress, that will finally once and for all pay us those docket 234 Indian Land Claim Commission monies. So that does feel like a win because we forced their hand, and it'll be contemporaneous acknowledgement of our community in Congress, so that feels good. I'm not going to be compelled to say a lot about our traditional life ways or culture or the way that we were living on the ground here, although I'm happy to talk about it in terms of questions and answers later. I think people generally have ideas of how Northwest Coast folks were living. I mean, meeting cedar longhouses, cedar canoes, connections to that cedar tree, and the types of resources that we utilized. But I do want to talk about our econom. So the lifeways that I'm talking about are really informed by econom. Econom are our traditional stories. And in our teaching, there are multiple eras of econom. So there are econom that talk about, well, they talk about before there were human beings. So y'all are familiar with stories, or you've heard about coyote stories or these things. Well, in our way of looking at it and in the way that we're taught about it, those were like people. They went around just like human beings. They lived in houses. You know, when the salmon used to return to the Columbia River, they came in canoes at that time. That's what I'm talking about. They were literally people. If you asked our elders, they said they just looked like Indians. But we called them coyote, blue jay, skunk, whatever it is. So there was a very, very long time that's who occupied this land. And then in our econom, there's another era, which is the time that they were preparing for human beings. And so those stories include the changer stories that maybe some of you have heard about, the coyote, like Coyote's epic journey, by the way, that started right here at Nakotat. So some of you may have known or heard about Coyote up on the Columbia River Gorge, or what he was doing as he went up the river. Well, that journey of his started here at Nakotat. But there was a lot of work done by those animal people, by Coyote, prepping for human beings. And that's what they were doing. They were going around saying, the people are coming soon. The people are coming soon. And so they put everything in place for humans. And then there's a third kind of era of stories, and those are stories about people, real people, human beings that have names and villages and ancestries. But all of those stories combined tell how it is that we're supposed to live on the ground. They explain to us all the ways that things came to be. And in those stories is the information in so many ways for the work that you all do. You know, these stories are loaded with science, and they're loaded with, you know, teachings that have a lot of value. We were sitting at the table here over dinner saying, or I was talking, or lamenting, maybe it was what I was doing, about, you know, just how different the world could have been here if people had taken a moment to actually have value or consider the value in the indigenous people's knowledge, right? The indigenous people's stories. Like, and by the way, I believe the answer to so much of the work that I think compels y'all is in that. So there's a lot of damage control that I think you all are involved with, from the decision making that happened early on in our area from people that had zero consideration for any indigenous information. They took advantage of indigenous information by putting their towns on our towns. Because why? Because we knew where the best drainage was after 10,000 years, or the best resource access, or whatever. But, you know, it just, you know, my hope, I think our community's belief is that the future, you know, a healthy future for our environment, for our communities, is in people indigenizing the way that they're thinking. And I'm talking about our economy because that's where that information lives. right? Those are the universities of our people. If you know these stories, you absolutely cannot look at this place without reference to them. Like I said, coming to Nakutat to me means, well, probably every one of those eras of stories has teaching. It is the place where I'm betting nobody knows this. Killer whales have their origin at Nakutat. This is where killer whales came to be. And it came to be because of a young boy named Stikwa. And so I can't be here without thinking about Stikwa or thinking about what they did to both in misbehaving and ways that you're not supposed to be as human beings. And that in turn is what drove people in that community to make this transition to become killer whales and other things that happened. You know, the binding that mussels have where they hold on to a rock came from that story. The little river, one of the little rivers that were near here, um, you know, it was put in place by Coyote when he started his journey. What fish can be in that river? You know, there was a time when there were big fall salmon there, and Coyote said, no, it's not big enough for you, and that's how it was made. They say if you catch a fall, like a big fall Chinook salmon in that river, it's a bad sign. Somebody's gonna die. And that's, you know, these are all things that come along with the stories. That includes, so by the way, we're not in storytelling season, so we don't get to tell stories, and we're also very, very careful with how we share these stories. So storytelling for us is the winter time. It's the only time these stories can be told in full. We talk about these stories all the time. They're referenced all the time. Our ancestors, our elders, they went around having a reference to these stories in everything that they were doing. But you can't actually tell the stories. I was going to tell something about a story, and I'm just going to skip it. Maybe we'll have a chance later. I think what I really want to say is, you know, our Chinook community, which is something I want to really talk about for a minute now, is, you know, in a struggle around federal acknowledgement. And so for us, I'm telling you, like, I want us to share these stories. I want our communities here to know these stories. I want kids to grow up with these stories the same way that our people did, so that they have a different way of looking at the place. But everything that we've shared, or maybe not even willingly shared, does feel like it's been abused, exploited, taken away from us, whatever. So, you know, for me, our ability to share this information in the way that we want to rests on federal acknowledgement and clear status and the ability for us to govern ourselves in our own territory. Because at that point, I feel like we'll be strong enough, powerful enough, whatever it is, to protect these things of ours. Because in the end, the wealth that my community has at this point is our songs, our dances, these stories, right? It's kind of more intangible stuff because, you know, most of my life, our Chinook community has had less than an acre of land. And so you get the point. But I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm talking about with federal acknowledgement, and then say a few things about just working with tribes generally, because there was a reference to it. I worked 25 years directly for really my neighboring tribes, because our tribe doesn't have the resources to have people employed doing the work that I was able to do for my neighboring tribes, which was culture and language revitalization work. The goofy part of the story is I learned what I was able to go help teach for my federally recognized neighbors in my unfederally recognized community, which what I learned was kind of a language and a half besides English, 2.5 languages if you want to call English. But Chinnaquawa was a language that I had the benefit of learning, and then the Tlawaltamish language, which is what my name, Nostio, is in that language. That's the lower Chehalis language. It's closely related to the Tillamook language to the south of us, as well as, well, its roots are in Grays Harbor. But Salish, there's a lot of Salish folks in the world, right? And so the Salish languages have a lot of currency, or had a lot of currency, and much more so than our Chinookan language. So we actually had a community where folks were using Salish at one time more than Chinook, even though they were Chinook folks. I mentioned Tansy Point. Tansy Point is not so very far from here. It's between Astoria, well, Warrenton and Hammond on the south shore of the Columbia River. It's part of the Clatsop tribe's territory and is, well, was the location of a treaty negotiation that happened in 1851. A man named Anson Dart was sent out here. His charge was to move all the native people from the mouth of the Columbia River east of the Cascades to Yakima. So he came, that was what he was told he was to do, and we convinced him otherwise. We convinced him that, it just made no sense. And by the way, we weren't going to sign any treaty that would move us from the bones of our ancestors. That's what we insisted on. We're staying with the bones of our ancestors. And this idea of sovereignty is no joke to us. Like, it springs from the land and it springs from our ancestors. And so for us, we just could not imagine a world where we would move away from our lands. But those treaties were, well, all 5 of our tribes negotiated treaties, all 5 of the tribes of the Chinook Indian Nation. Those were taken back to the Senate, and because they did not remove us east of the mountains, they weren't acted on. Interestingly, they weren't dismissed, they were just tabled. And so a few years later, Governor Stevens from Washington State, at that point territorial governor Isaac Stevens, brought us back together for a treaty negotiation at the Chehalis River. Same thing. We said we would not leave the bones of our ancestors. His job at that time was to move us to the Olympic Peninsula. So again, the goal was remove all Native people, all Chinook people from the mouth of the Columbia River. He, and you'd never know this because they kept meeting minutes, and I assure you they don't say this, he showed us the boats that his people came in on. He said, we will take every one of your men, women, and children on these boats to the ocean and drown you if you don't sign this treaty. He at some point took his hat off, said he would fill it with gold if we would just sign the treaty. He's extremely frustrated by our unwillingness to leave our territory. But we refused. And, we have paid a real price for that, meaning that I'll say we have all the issues of Indian country and no means of dealing with it because we don't have any of the resources that typically go to a tribe. Because in the end, no reservation was set aside for us. We don't have a tribal agency, and we don't have a relationship with the federal government. Despite that, we still were forced to Indian boarding schools. We were given blue cards to hunt and fish as Indians. We We're given allotments on our neighboring reservation, so every single Chinook family member or family, we're given allotments. We have IIM accounts where money is mismanaged by the federal government, but for tribal folks. I'm saying all this because it's not as though they have ever said we're not Indians or we're not tribal folks. It's just they have refused to, ultimately allow us to stay in our place. But despite that, we stayed, obviously. And it's the reason that I could tell you these things about Nakutat or Stiqua or whatever, because by not leaving, so we paid a serious price for refusing to sign treaties, but we also kept our wealth of knowledge of our place by not leaving it. Because when folks have been removed from their territory in Indian country, it's devastating for the knowledge of the land and the place. In the 1950s, there was the Western Oregon Termination Act. I think y'all probably are aware of that. That resulted in all the tribes in Western Oregon and Klamath being terminated by Congress. That act named our two tribes in Oregon and the Chinook erroneously, because that's on the Washington side, but it named it. So that happened. In the 1970s, they created a system to try to recognize tribes because there was a lot of folks like Chinook in this country that had been neglected. Chinook chose to go with that system. It's an administrative system. It was created in 1978 by Congress. It gave the power to administrations and the Bureau of Indian Affairs to recognize tribes. So we said within a year of the creation of that we had a letter of intent to the federal government that, hey, you need to look at us out here at the mouth of the Columbia River. We've been neglected. Our neighbors in Oregon, again, two of our tribes from Oregon, but our neighbors that were named in those termination acts and already had reservations began a process of getting restoration back through Congress. We watched that happen. In hindsight, that would have been probably a smart move for Chinook, but we were committed to a process that had been promised to us to be timely and fair for the recognition of the Chinook community. Fast forward for us, 21 years later, we regained our status, or we actually gained recognition under the Clinton administration in January of 2001. During that time that we were in this process, all of the tribes that had been terminated in Western Oregon and Klamath managed to get reinstated, restored through Congress. We finally felt like we had justice for our situation because the man that was in charge of the Bureau of Indian Affairs at that time, Kevin Gover, who's an acknowledged expert in Indian affairs or Indian law, apologized profusely to the Chinook folks from here, said the Bureau of Indian Affairs would be our home in Washington, D.C. forever after that. And we all breathed a sigh of relief and started work on healing for our community. 18 months later, under the new administration, Bush administration that came in, our recognition was rescinded. And I'm not going to go into all the details of it. I will just say that devastated the community another time, right? Because there's been plenty of devastating things that have ultimately happened in our community. But, that took us a while to dust off from. After 23 years in a process, we do have a lawsuit where we've sued the federal government on a number of issues related to this situation I'm talking about. But what we're really doing right now is we are asking our delegations in Oregon and Washington to support a restoration bill to just once and for all take care of this issue for the Chinook Indian Nation. So this is hugely important. You know, we need the assistance of any and everybody that's willing to stand up for something that's right in the world here. And so we're pushing hard. We had a rally last Monday in front of our senator's offices in Seattle. We have a new micro website up that's just about that issue. It's chinookjustice.org. It's a place where people can go to sign a petition, to write a letter to your representative and your senators. But hugely important, both for us, but also just because it really is, you know, one of the, I mean, just being as kind as can be, just one of the mistakes that the government of the United States made along the way in trying to deal with Indian country. I'm gonna be happy to answer any questions about that situation. I will say, you know, the fact that those 3 tribes of ours were named in the Western Oregon Termination Act, that there were 60 plus tribes named in that act. Every other tribe has been named and restored in the Confederated Tribes, basically, that have been reconstituted through acts of Congress. Every tribe named except our 3 tribes, so the Clatsop, Cathlamet, and Chinook. So pretty good arguments here for why this work just needs to be done once and for all. You know, thinking about the work that y'all do, I wished I'd had time to jump in on a few sessions today and really get a better sense of what's happening. You know, I had another fellow tribal member participate in a panel this morning regarding just collaboration between tribal organizations, entities, tribes, whatever, and organizations doing your work. But I didn't get to do that. We actually had a loss in our family, which is why I'm at, like I said, I was 90-some%. Maybe I'm not 70, maybe I'm 75%, I don't know. But I spent the morning trying to get my wife onto an airplane to be with family to assist in that. So thank you for bearing with me in that regard, because I actually had some images and things I was gonna bring you and just couldn't make that the priority. But you know, it just seems so important, this knowledge that I'm referring to, or, you know, just place-specific information, place-specific genetics even, are so important to the work. And what I mean by that is, you know, we see, you know, folks do work in our area and they'll bring in, it's a Western red cedar, so bring it in. But where'd that Western red cedar come from, right? I mean, where's its roots? You know, we want plants put in our place that are from our place, right? That have the memories and genetics of our places. You know, really compelled to try to help folks find ways to connect with tribes. Every tribe is different. Tribes are in flux. I mean, there's always something changing. You know, the people that are your access points change. Like, organizations need to build really deep relationships in tribal communities to be able to have like sustainable access points for the information that I'm up here saying, I think is important for people to, defer to, lift up, to put value in. Can't tell you how many people I've talked to who said, well, they call the tribes and nobody calls them back or whatever. Well, it has to be more than calling. And by the way, maybe you're going to call a tribe and you're going to just luck of the draw, get the person you need. But that is not always the way that it works in Native country. People have to be prepared, organizations have to be prepared to do real and hard work to build, like I said, sustainable relationships, and then a lot of time to build trust to be able to actually gain access to information that has value to your work. I think it's really important. Well, I guess I should say, just my being asked to speak here tonight is a part of that. Well, it's the right thing to do when you're on somebody's tribal territory, that you give deference to, pay some respect to the tribal community on whose land you're at or working, working on daily. Yeah, I think, none of that is easy. I mean, these attempts to connect and work into Indian country, Native country isn't pretty in terms of there's nothing's perfect, right? There's a lot of damage going on in communities. There's varying levels of even just respect for traditions, right? You may have a traditional group of people in a community and a group of people that are just absolutely bought into a different system. Like, you have to do the work to find folks. You have to be able to do the research yourself and question things maybe that don't sound right, but also do it in the context of giving deference, I guess, to the folks that you're talking to. I mean, what I mean by that, by the way, is there are some tribes that don't know, like almost know no boundaries. They just have these really broad views of where they should be, and sometimes that steps on the toes of others. I'll tell you, a community like Chinooks, or like our Chinook community here at the mouth of the river, without a federally recognized tribe at the mouth of the river, there is a vacuum at the mouth of the river that other tribes want to fill, or just, even if they don't necessarily wake up feeling that way, the federal government, the Army Corps, is going to do work, and they want a tribe to sign off on that work. They're going to reach out, and all of a sudden somebody starts coveting our country. This is something that Chinook has been really good at, and it sucks that we have to spend our energy doing, which is protecting our place. We just, during NAGPRA, I don't know if y'all know what NAGPRA was, Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, that made museums build inventories of culturally sensitive objects that they had, human remains from tribal communities that they have. We went to every museum in our area and said, you will not invite another tribe to this territory. You talk to us and we will invite the tribe to this territory, because that's our tradition. This is the way that we go. We don't accept somebody coming in and doing work here without acknowledging and or having a relationship and working with us. And so we have been pretty hardcore about that over time. But I guess I'm just saying all this as a point of reference to there's not a perfect answer to working with tribes. Every tribe, like I said up front, is different. And, I will continue to stand on the fact that it is hugely valuable or essential for the work that we need to do for healing our places and our environment, and even frankly, the way that human beings are together, because these teachings exist in our teachings too. And we think there's value in it, and we think there's, we want people to have the benefit of those teachings. But I believe that exists in our knowledge, that it's knowledge from the place, that folks should have respect for that. And so, I'd ask folks to just join me in thinking that there's value in that, and just then figuring out how it is that you're going to do the work to, the hard work to invest in relationships in the tribal communities that are around you. I said that Native country can be rough, and maybe I don't really want to make this, I'm not going to end on this, but I'm just going to say this out loud. Folks, the things where you look into Indian country and you think, wow, like there's some screwed up stuff going on in Indian country. And what I'm telling you right now, that's not our traditions. Those are the things that were given to us in those schools. So these boarding schools were no joke. They took generations of our families there. My great-grandmother would not even say the word Chamawa for what happened to her. Her relatives died in that school. Her best friend came back with one arm in that school. I know nobody who went to those schools that was not either physically, sexually, culturally, whatever, abused. And, that causes incredible damage in communities. So I'm just asking folks to recognize that, these were decisions put on to our tribal communities, happened for generations. People came home from those situations and self-medicated, and some percentage of those folks perpetuated what they were taught as kids in their own communities. And it's a freaking disaster. And what I'm trying to say to you is Chinook deserves the right to be acknowledged. We were Indian enough to have all that happen to us. We should be Native enough in the eyes of the government to allow us access to the resources to do some of the healing and that we need to do. The other part of that is all of our neighboring tribes right now are nation building with the COVID relief fund, with the infrastructure funds, all those dollars that have come out in recent years. They're moving key infrastructure out of the danger of the tsunami zones and sea level rise potential and whatever else. Our folks need that. Our tribal office sits in Bay Center, Washington, on an island in Willapa Bay. The bridge that's there will not survive a 9-point earthquake, and the only thing that we get to do is sit there and hope that you're higher than a tsunami, and I don't think you are in our situation. And so, there's so much that we need in terms of, or what would come with federal acknowledgement. And I'm saying there's this added benefit of our ability then and finally to really help teach folks that are living on our lands the way of living here that we inherited over 10,000 years of experience. And with that, I'm gonna break. I swear I'm gonna say something more uplifting. But thank you all, truly, for listening, for bearing with some of that, and for considering what it is that I felt compelled to share with you tonight. And maybe I'll say this, these are not my words. Meaning these are the words of my elders. I had good teachers. The man that named me, Nastio, was also named Tony. He spoke 5 languages. He was my grandfather's best friend, and I spent a great deal of time with him. I spent time with many of our elders in their living rooms, in their woodsheds, in their kitchens, washing dishes, whatever it was, just to learn from them. And these are the words that they felt compelled to share. These are the thoughts that they felt compelled to share. And, it's really a weight on my shoulders to share them every chance I get. Because for one, those folks died without ever seeing their inheritance. And I don't mean some massive monetary inheritance. I just mean being acknowledged as who they were, because they got all the bad side of being native in this country and none of the positive. And so I just want that for our kids. I said, these are my kids' inheritance when I talked about who it is that we are. And, that's hugely important. So I think you're going to join me. And yeah, looking forward to answering any questions that y'all have, or somebody tell a joke. Just to say this, we raise our hands up to people. I don't know how many people know that. We're just doing this because that means we're putting you above us. So I can't say how much that meant to me that y'all stand up and acknowledge that. And I'm just saying this, right? Like that, and that humility that's built into that's what our teachings are. And it's one of the reasons that y'all haven't seen or heard so much of what I have to say, I'm sharing, because our people are not taught to go out and pound tables or raise themselves up, right? I swear I'm going to sit. But our word, our greeting in our language is tlachawim, tlachawim, tlachawim. Sometimes people will just say tlachawya, tlachawya, tlachawya. That word tlachawayam, it means it's the thing that makes you feel pity. That's what that word means. It's saying it's the thing that makes you feel pity. And that's how we say hello and goodbye to each other, because we're lowering ourselves to each other, right? It's maybe like Eastern Asian folks bowing to each other or whatever, right? This is what we do. And I think that it's really important about, just how we approach the world and each other.
All right. Well, God, that's a lot. Move what? Oh, we can't see the folks over there? Hi, folks. Sorry. So we've got two people on each side of the room. We have Victoria Fischella is in the back. And what we're going to do here is, if you have any questions, just raise your hand, and either Victoria or we have Kelly Dawes over here. They will come to you with the mics, and you can ask your question. Might help if you just state your name and a little bit of background to help us out. So I'll open it up for questions. At this point, there's a lot of information.
Thank you for sharing your heart and your thoughts. I just have a quick question. I heard you expecting, we liked that we will be more respect of the generations and of our elders. But I also know that you guys also have some respect for the land, respect for the water, respect for the resources. But I didn't hear much of that also. Could you elaborate a little bit of how can we, because most of us today here are try to be natural resources stewards. And I know you have provided role model for maintaining lands, maintaining our environment, trying to secure the future for our generations.
Well, I suspect I didn't say that because it's just built into what I was thinking. And so what I mean by that is these teachings that I'm referring to in our econom, they talk about, they kind of set the rules for all the ways in which we utilize and or don't utilize resources, right? Very, strict rules that were put in place, for instance, by Coyote. When Coyote was making his journey, he would fish in a particular spot, and they would say to him, "Oh, do you really think it's like it was at the last spot? At this spot, you have to," and then, name it. Or it was, if you've set your net twice and you've caught fish, you're not allowed to set your net again. If you see somebody catching fish, or if you catch fish in your net, you can't pass another fisherman. I mean, these are just simple rules, but they all add up to just a natural law about how to conserve a resource. And I hope that makes sense.
If there are any other questions, we've got somebody here, but I wanted to ask a quick question if I could. One of the things I heard you say that really sort of struck me was you said that I'm going to paraphrase, you're hoping that people are indigenizing their thinking. Can you expound on that just a little bit about what that is and what that means? I mean, we all, I appreciate you recognizing here too that we all have a value in the resources. It's just we have different ways that we're coming at this. And so I was appreciating you with the indigenizing of their thinking, but could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that is my point ultimately, and it's certainly not my idea. I mean, meaning that, folks do talk about indigenizing any number of different places and spaces, but, maybe it's even a hard thing to describe, but I think, I guess going back to the beginning, my reference to how different would our place be today if people that arrived here as immigrants from out of the country or out of this land had genuinely taken the time to learn and respect the ways in which indigenous folks were doing things. I just believe that, when this grandfather of mine, Oskala was a kind of key player in Astoria when Astoria was first founded. He was a person that was providing access point to resources and providing food for the folks that had settled there. And they would get so frustrated, the Americans in that case, because they saw the fish in the river and we refused to sell them fish that were being caught at the start of these fish runs because we have very strict rules about the way that we treat the first salmon. They wanted those fish, could not understand at all why it was that we wouldn't give them access, but it's because we believed that they wouldn't follow the taboos and traditions. And it's those taboos and traditions that assure that fish will continue to come back. And so I'm hoping that maybe illustrates a point, but, had folks put to mind all of these rules for individual places, I think our resource base would just look so different right now than it does.
Do you think it could be that we would want to start to begin to have a similar deference to the resource, respecting the tradition, even though we don't necessarily understand it? Is that, in a sense, what you're getting at with the indigenizing? I don't want to belabor the point, but
I mean, I think the answer is yes, and I mean, look at the state of our place, right? I mean, it's hard to argue that we have these perfect answers to fix the problems, right? People are making progress here or there, but yeah, it just, from our perspective, it's hard to not question a lot of, people's just coming up with random, I don't mean random, but coming up with ideas to, fix a problem that was, it's the same, ultimately the same country, same society, whatever it is, right? That created a problem and is now trying to fix a problem. And so I'm suggesting, yeah, maybe think a little bit. Might feel radical to some folks, but it doesn't feel radical to those of us who have this as the way that we were raised or born or believe in. That, yeah, there is a way that worked here for 10,000 years, so why not defer to some of that teaching and thinking?
okay, do we have another question out there? We got a couple.
Nashio, I'm Janice. Just a quick question. If one wanted to be invited to your winter storytelling, how does one go about that? And you have to be invited. You indicated other tribes are not welcome unless they're invited by you. So how would someone like myself ever learn your stories?
I do think a lot of it is just building relationships. I mean, there are opportunities to see and access at least some version of these stories. In the Chinook situation, we really are more protective of this stuff than some other tribes. There are individual storytellers and access points around that are, great places to be able to start or experience seeing this stuff. But because of the history I told you about, and I believe it, it's real, that we.
No, it sounds like a lot of your teachings are very wise, and I've done a lot of reading on different tribes, just a few, and I'm no expert at all in that. But if this is how we would learn, be able to listen to your stories, to learn how to take care of the earth, it seems like that would be, if we could make that friendship, then that's what we need to do.
That's really the answer in the short term, is that people build relationships. Noah sitting here with Nicanicum Watershed is, somebody that we have gotten to know and trust. And I think he and I have been out on the ground any number of times where people in the community are willing, interested, and want to share that information because it's a relationship that has grown up and is trusted. And, I think, folks, people can just build those relationships from your organizations into communities. And, tribes, a lot of the tribes have natural resources departments that are implementing some of these lifeways and teachings into the ways that they're approaching the lands that they manage. Like I said, for Chinook, I just need us to have this situation regarding our status fixed before, for one, even have the energy to expend on the other, because we work really hard to not stretch ourselves out in directions away from things that will lead to our clear status, federal acknowledgement with the government, because we could be pulled in a million other directions, and then the energy that we need to go to this situation isn't there. So we, by the way, have, in the case of COVID, there are 3, 4, 5 tribal communities that are related, where we're actually on Zoom a time, like once or twice a week, telling stories with each other. So it's been really interesting, and I believe there are ways where we can integrate, because what that's doing is it's bringing us together with our relatives in ways that we've not had an opportunity. That one's a very closed kind of scenario, but it really is awesome to see the life that's happening for these stories in a really unorthodox place. So I think there's all kinds of opportunities going forward in the future for better access, and I hope that that is something that you're able to accomplish.
Any other looks like we got a question over here. Oh, that was Victoria.
Thanks for coming. I'll walk around so I can see you. The point of first fish brought me to a thought. Is there anything as far as first plants, first deer? Is there anything in the language that says that for the conservation, the salmon was conservation of salmon to make sure that you had runs later? Now, how about plants like wapato and camas, the deer and other things, other types of wildlife and things like that that served as a resource? Is there anything in there? Thank you.
There are teachings about each and every one of those plants. That most communities have some version or another of a first foods ceremony that goes beyond just, in that case, it's referring to all of these traditional foods. It's not all as formalized as our sensibilities around salmon, but there are really interesting teachings around many of these plants, including when I was saying kind of like the science of it or whatever, just like the place that these individual plants want to be is described in the stories, right? Salmon, I told you salmon came in the Columbia River by canoe. Well, at the time that they were getting ready for human beings, salmon was going along, and there were his relatives on the shore, and they would, wave him over, whatever, and then they were saying, oh, you're, skunk cabbage, and you're going to be there for this emergency situation, and we'll put you under the alders, or we'll put you, right? They'd place them in their spot. They put elk skin blanket. They gave them a war club. These are the things that they are, right? It's when you see skunk cabbage first stand up in the spring, they're holding that war club and they're wrapped in their blanket, right? So this is, the way that every single one of these plants and animals look, and so much about what they do, how they're useful, even their personalities are built into these stories. And so if you do have a respect for those, you're just, the nature of it is that you're going to, look at the resource differently, treat it differently. By the way, everything but cottonwood.
Oh, really? Wait, what? What's going on with cottonwood?
We have a story in which all the trees get their value. It's 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 Robin's myth, by the way, the bird Robin. But she asks each of the trees, there's a story obviously about it, asks them a question and they answer really in these respectful ways that our culture demands. And so they are given their, like, the things that they are. You know, you'll make paddles, you'll be the broom, you'll be whatever it is, right? But Cottonwood insulted Robin and went against our culture. And so in our teaching, Cottonwood's worthless. There's actually no, you can't even burn it is anyway, won't even be good for firewood.
Okay, I want to be very respectful of your time. You've been extraordinarily generous to us tonight. So maybe if there's one more question, and then we might have to wrap this up, I think. We do have one. And by the way, I can't, it's hard to see out there from up here. They didn't give me my sunglasses for this thing, so.
That's okay. I'm a very small person. This is Susie. Tony, thank you so much for tonight. This was really powerful. I guess probably the last question for the night is, how can we help you and the Chinook people find federal recognition? Is there anything that all of us can do to help you?
Yeah, that ChinookJustice.org, and thanks for finishing with this. ChinookJustice.org is really the kind of easy access point to be able to do something in terms of, like I said, sign a petition. You can send letters directly there to members of your delegation. But also, follow, it's at Everyday Chinook on Instagram. So at Everyday Chinook. That is a fantastic, I mean, whatever, I'm biased, but it is a really fantastic Insta page, right? We have a photographer that is a, Pulitzer Prize nominated journalist and photographer who's just an amazing person from Sussex in England originally, who just has been working with our community for years and is always in community, shooting photographs and documenting what's going on. And that Instagram page is a place where you can access a lot of that. But it's also a place where you'll see rallies coming up. We had a kickoff rally I told you about last Monday. There will be more to follow those up. Bottom line is, we just need folks, when you're with your electeds, to just say, look, there's been a crime at the mouth of the Columbia River. Like, we have neglected the indigenous people from the mouth of the Columbia River. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. The country has extracted billions of dollars of resources from our place, and the very least they can do is just acknowledge our existence, acknowledge our sovereignty, which we continue to have, and just let us move forward like every other tribe. We just need to be able to, under the eyes of the government, govern ourselves, acquire land, manage that land, have a voice that has more clout in our own territory to protect our territory, just to protect our territory and to allow us to, these things that I'm talking to you about tonight have a right to thrive here. Like, Chinook people should be able to live and thrive here. We are very, very close to a little place called Indian Place that is a spot where my wife's family lived, was the last kind of remnant village in Nakotat. And, you know, well, I'll just leave it at that. The descendants of those folks, of our people, should have a right to be here and thrive. And I believe our people thriving here benefits everybody.
One of the things I just wanted to share with everybody is Tony has thanked us several times for having the opportunity to come here today to speak with us, and he made the journey down to do that. And I want to reassure everyone here that he is absolutely serious when he says that. Normally, a keynote speaker for a conference usually is paid with an honorarium or some kind of dollar value, usually whatever they say, it's usually fairly high. And we offered that to Tony and he said no. So he's here to share with us all the things that he just shared. So I don't know if the Chinook Nation has a donation page, or we're going to be looking into that personally, but I think that might be another way for those of us who might feel so inclined. So all of the things that he just shared with us came straight from the heart in the form of partnership and understanding. So really, really appreciate you doing that. Thank you very much, sir.